Tim, so that.
Okay. Well, welcome to a Certified Burn Manager Program Advisory Committee meeting for a lot of folks from the public as well. It's exciting to see the interest in the program. I'm gonna hit the record. Shelby, if you want to hit the record button for us.
It is already recording.
Cool, thank you.
Yep.
So a couple Zoom etiquette things with this being a virtual meeting. If we can have the committee members have their cameras on. And if you can put your identifier in next to your name, that'd be great. For the folks joining from the public, happy to have your camera on. If you want to, otherwise, if you want to just hang out with them off, that works as well. And we do have a public comment on at 9:40. We're going to stick as close to that time as possible for that. Regardless, if we're in the middle of a topic, we'll just take a pause and honor that time slot for the folks who came here to provide any comments to the committee. So with that, I'll turn it over to Amanda to make sure we got folks here and for a roll call.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks again for convening. Really appreciate everyone being here today, especially the folks from the public who are interested in our program. I need to make sure that the folks we have here meet a quorum, and also because we have one of our committee members here who was not able to join our first meeting, I would like us to do a quick round of introductions with just the committee. Myself, I'll start with, I'm not on the committee, but I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Amanda Rao, ODF Prescribed Fire Coordinator. And I'll go to Kenny next.
Kenny Rose with Jacina Resources. My background, about 24 years in fire, 11 years with ODF before I went to private timber company.
John?
John Pontius, Oregon State University. I'm a professor that teaches about forestry and fire, and I've been working on the Certified Burn Manager program for quite a while now. So thanks for including me.
Yeah, you bet. Katie?
Yeah, good morning, Katie Sauerbray. Excuse me. Morning, frog in my throat. I'm the Director of Fire Management for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon, as well as chair of the Prescribed Fire Council.
And Mark?
Good morning, Mark Shea, Medford Fire Department. Been in fire service for 20 plus years, wildfire and structural, and work on our wildfire programs for the city of Medford.
Thanks, Mark. And we do have one more committee member who is scheduled to join us this morning, but she won't be here for another 15 minutes or so. That's Katie McKendrick. So that means we have a quorum. We have one, and we will have one in addition with her being present. With that, I think don't have much else on that first agenda item as far as introductions are concerned. Unless you can think of anything else, Tim, I think I'll go ahead and hand it off to you.
Sounds good. So for folks who haven't seen, and for a lot of our other people joining today, I'll share the agenda quickly. Okay, did it actually pop up? Yeah. So welcome to introductions. We're going to take a look at the committee charter. We had enough feedback on it that we'll be able to walk that through and get either finalized or finalized in principle by the end of the discussion for that. And then Amanda's going to be walking through the burn plan templates. And depending on the timing, we do have public comment at 9:40, and then the remainder is instructor guide review. It's going to take, that's a big chunk of the meeting as we hand off to try to build that part of the program, and then any updates at the end. So that's kind of the run of show for today. So that I'm going to jump to the other document that I'm supposed to actually talk about. Okay, so back to the fun parts of committees as having a charter, so that folks know where it's at. And there's a couple to-dos that we left with last time. I'll start with the first one was the committee had asked for the department to review whether or not with the revocations, if there is a way to confer in private on that, or have those presentations be done outside of the public. And after researching that, the term for that is executive session, and executive session under public meeting law is fairly restricted to certain topics, essentially legal matters and of a particular nature, and then also like executive or director of an agency performance reviews by whatever governing board they have. So those two major examples. For this one in particular, is the review of those is still it still would fall under the meeting, as that's one of the charges of the committee, is reviewing any potential revocations. We all hope that that's something we don't have to exercise very often, if at all. And with that in mind, the department will have very well-prepared briefing packets for committee members for that type of stuff. So we do have some, there are other agencies who do undergo this with review committees. DPSST is one of those so there is some examples of what we can lean on for state agency partners to be able to have the committee be comfortable with the process. So we'll be further researching that to make sure that it runs as smoothly as possible when we get to that. So that being said, on the lead off, we can get into some of the other changes in here. The background of this one was fairly solid. We didn't have any comments on that. Particularly use of fire is all over chapter 477 and 526 for this. So this is just the authorities for use of fire and forest management, prescribed burning in particular in general. Scope and charge of the committee. So it's an advisory committee. Decision-making had a little bit of, had an N up, or an N had to add to there just for some grammar. So those types of things were picked up. The guiding principles were also consistent. Where we had one of the major ones, and this is a committee discussion point, is that there's two methodologies for putting together committees. What was presented originally was that there was alternatives identified for each committee member, and then there was also a discussion asked about the ability to have a proxy. And generally in charters for committees, you have one or the other. So the first one is for alternatives. The theory is that the more you'd have more people available to sit there. So there's 7 seats on the committee. You would have 7 people per meeting for that, with an alternative option identified. With the proxy option, you're given your vote per se, or discussion points to another committee member. So you don't necessarily have a full 7 committee. You've transferred that to somebody else. So you may only have 5 people at a committee, with some folks having additional inputs. So it's kind of one to have some discussion with the committee on which is preferable. Weighing those two options, is it preferable to have individuals who on the committee, or kind of leaving them to find an alternative on representation under like the organization side with an alternative? So kind of a different philosophy there. Wanted to leave it a little open-ended for some thoughts. Presented in here is both options. I want to have both the language that available. So alternatives have the same rights as the members when fulfilling their duties as an alternative member. So that would be that, they're sitting in that seat to fill in. The proxy alternative language would replace all of would remove the alternatives and insert of a CBM AC member may designate another member to vote by proxy. No member may serve as a proxy for more than one absent member. So that way you can't have a bunch of folks just adding extra voices to one person. So any initial thoughts on either one of those? You get the proposal is that one option of the two. John.
So given that we're an advisory committee, I think that having the voices from each of our respective areas of emphasis, I think, is more important than like building a block of voting around a specific issue, which would be more the proxy. So I'm in favor of keeping the alternative language as opposed to the proxy language.
Waiting for someone else to come off mute. I second John's. Okay. So
Yeah,
Katie,
and I could go either direction on it in reality, for myself. So, really what the consensus is what I will support.
okay. You guys
I'll
make,
agree with John's statement.
you all make this very easy. So, appreciate that. So yeah, okay. Our initial leaning was, we want to try to foster discussion in an advisory manner with the committee, still having more people in the room is always helpful. So I'm going to delete this comment then. Assuming my mouse starts working, and accept that. So that was the biggest sticking point in here, for moving forward. The remainder of the we have references for non-committee member attendees. That's the other 20 people on the call, which is fantastic. I'm super excited to have so many folks join. We haven't exercised the chairs and subcommittees. I imagine that'll be more formalized as the committee evolves and matures with process. All the materials get posted online. This being a public meeting, the department will make sure we comply with public meeting law. So that's why the meeting's being recorded. All the summaries of action items and that kind of stuff will be posted online, including the Zoom chat and that kind of stuff. So you'll see those materials. Helps with communicating with the public as well. The working through the work plan, I envision that eventually we'll get more into a rotation, but right now it's kind of a on call or at call when needed till we get going, and then we'll be reporting back. John had his we cleaned up some of the references that we missed initially with the rules. This was utilized as a rules advisory committee charter, but it serves pretty well, and we just missed a couple edits there. John.
So if you could back up to quorum, just up above there, the way it's currently phrased, it says 51% of the CBMAC organizations. I think you mean voting organizations, because I don't think you want to count in quorum the non-voting members, because they may not be as likely to come to the meeting because they're not voting. Does that make sense to everybody?
Great catch. And as well, consistent with previous, no division of this group is 51%. So a few more edits there. Majority is at least 51%. We just left it as majority. This was another one of John's catches as we went through. So we had a note of other conflicts of interest. This was public officials. And I'm just going to change this a little bit. Of just conflicts of interest, whether eventually, the administrative rules that govern the committee says that there's preference given to folks who are certified burn managers, which as the program evolves, it may be the entire committee at some point. So acknowledging that it is a committee of review of potentially of peers as we do go through this. So this may be of substance currently, but if the committee is completely CBMs, it kind of becomes a moot point at that preference. So for now, of including in there, we added that there might be certified burn managers at Vision if folks are reviewing someone from the same company or to that effect. That may be worth a note, but it simply is saying that there may be that you are a representative of so-and-so. It doesn't necessarily go any further than that. So it's just acknowledgement. So. Any questions? That was probably the biggest one last time, besides the the proxy portions. Okay. And then you're on an advisory committee. That's the last portion. So seeing that,
But
with-
Tim, I had a couple other things that just popped up as I was reading through this again.
Okay.
So under on page 4, CBMAC commitments. Number 6. The end of that says share all relevant information to the maximum extent possible. Is that intended to mean within the CBMAC committee, or are you wanting us to like post it in the newspaper, right? So that would be the maximum extent possible. So I think that is intended to be internal communications, but I wasn't exactly sure what that was referencing.
Yes, on the internal portion of it. The intent is that if there's something that wants to be, if a committee member would want to share something at a meeting, that similar to us, ODF posting the materials as far ahead as we can, available for review, that the committee members would have review of similar materials if a committee member would be doing a presentation at one of the meetings.
So could we say in there, provide information to CBMAC members and associated ODF personnel? That gives me some clarity on where that's going.
Yeah.
Does that ring true to other folks?
Makes sense?
And then one other, this is really picky, but number 9, each member agrees to, is basically saying the same thing as what the preamble there says at the start of this section, right? We all are agreeing to participate in good faith. I would just pull that out because I think it's redundant and just start with work. So don't get rid of the whole thing, but just says where the beginning of that section would start with the word work.
There we go. Okay.
And then way down at the bottom, under open meetings and records.
Yep.
We have one in there in like the second paragraph under D, where it says we can participate through telephonic conference calls. Can we say telephonic and or video?
I'm just miskeying stuff because I'm wordsmithing something in front of a group on video. So,
And then one other spot there, and I think this is just a holdover in that same thing. It says all records of the body. I think that's holdover for something else. That's never defined. I think you mean the CBMAC of the committee. There you go. Perfect.
Yeah.
Yep. Cool. That's what I had. Thank you.
good. So if there's other things that are in here that are cosmetic, we can keep getting them modified. If there's something major, we can bring it back. This isn't that you're stuck with it from now on. I envision that this will adjust as the committee evolves and the committee identifies its body of work and starts working through that this is the guidance document to fall back on. So we can evolve it as it goes. And I envision that it would be something that would be popped up routinely just for reference, as well as we bring on, rotate through committee members and that kind of stuff. So, okay. Other than that, I just want to if I can get a thumbs up, I'm gonna accept all the edits that are in here, and then it'll get posted. Cool. Thank you. That's all I got, Amanda. It's turning it over to you 5 minutes early.
Sounds good. Thanks, Tim. So before I get started on looking over the edits to the burn plan, I just want to acknowledge something that has impacted my ability to reflect some of your suggestions. As you might remember, during our last meeting, Tim was live editing the burn plans and putting comments in his computer, and he was doing it on his desktop, and his computer shut down and those edits were lost. And so we took the video transcript and transcribed it. Thank you, Shelby, so much for doing that, by the way. And then I took those notes and I went back to the burn plan and worked through the notes to identify the things that were changed in the plan during the last meeting. So there was a little bit of a different approach there than we were hoping for, but that's okay. We work around things and find ways when things don't work out. So I just want to acknowledge that we didn't necessarily change every single thing that was suggested. Some of it I thought through and disregarded, not because I didn't think it was important, but because I saw that it was covered somewhere else. But if you have anything that you were suggesting that you didn't see get in here, that you think we missed, or that you want to see get in here, this isn't the last chance, because this is all part of the instructor guide, and that is still something that's being vetted. And speaking of the instructor guide, I'm going to be using that to navigate the burn plans, because that's really where they're housed now at this point. It's part of that big package. There were a lot of suggestions on the pile burn plan template and not as many on the underburn broadcast burn template, which I actually think that's a good thing, because we wrote that pile burn plan template, or I should say I did, using the Nature Conservancy's example and then adjusting it pretty early on in our process. And then we shifted over to the broadcast understory. We didn't actually circle back to that one to update it with things that we came up with as a group when we did that understory broadcast burn plan. So those edits were particularly helpful. I think with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so that we can start looking at this stuff together as a group. I'm going to go back. I was just in here reviewing all this before getting started with you guys today. So give me a second. Can everybody see my screen right now? Yeah. All right. Cool. So here we go. Thanks for your patience with my scrolling. Here's the pile burn plan template. And actually, even just now, as I'm looking at this, I see that one of the things I did with the example that I created was I split these boxes. And I don't know if I should even try to do this right now, but I'll update this to have these boxes split in half. So there's signatures on one side and then the information on the other. That's just, to clarify, and that we're looking for both in that box, not just one signature. That's a little bit confusing. We also included registration, smoke clearance, and permits. There was some back and forth, at least for me, based on the suggestions around putting in the 7-day smoke registration specification, mentioning ferns specifically. And the reason I got away from both of those is because ferns itself is just a reporting online tool. It doesn't produce a number unto itself. The number is the NOAP or the PDM, so those are notifications of intent to do an action, and a permit for use of fire. PDM is a permit for use of fire. And those are things you need to do in advance. And then the burn and smoke permit obtained is in advance as well, but that's really the day before or day of. And so we can certainly clarify some of this and add more to these, but what we hadn't done at all in this section is put this in here in the original pile burn plan. Any thoughts? I can get going and not stop if I'm not careful. So either people have to stop me and say something, or I have to stop and ask if there's any questions or comments on this piece from the committee.
I have a couple questions. Yeah. So this pile burning template, is this for just inside closed fire season, or is this going to be something utilized through the winter as well? I'm trying to think of, the industry on how we do our pile burning and stuff, and trying to get that idea. And of course, I'm sorry I missed our first meeting with the association meeting that I had to attend. But just want to get clarification on some of that myself.
Yeah, thanks, Kenny. So, this is specifically associated with the rules, and the rules specify that the CBM will use a burn plan. And that's for either pile burning or broadcast understory burning. And my first attempt at this plan was to make it as short and simple and sweet as possible, so that it didn't become a barrier to getting pile burning done. And so I was trying to get it to a 1-pager. It got a little longer, mostly because the committee wanted to see more in it. So I had it actually shrunk down quite a bit, and then they wanted to see more in here. So we expanded it. So it is for use at any time of year, if as part of being a certified burn manager.
Okay, so once you're a certified burn manager, you got to follow these templates to be able to conduct a burn.
Or it, here's the thing, you don't have to use this template. It's that you have to cover all the things in here. And so if you wanted to come up with your own approach, we're open to that. It's really about making sure that ODF's okay with it, that we check, that we say, yes, that's a good template. We'll accept that as an alternative to this. And that's important because some of our partners with whom we will burn potentially will have say a federal template or some other template that we need to be able to accept, because we're not going to be telling others, oh, you should be using this. So we want to be flexible to that end. But we want to make sure, certain boxes get checked for information that's contained in it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Anything else? Okay, thanks for those questions. Those are good questions. And of course, pile burning right now doesn't require a plan within ODF protection. So this is a new thing, but to clarify, it's for CBMs, not a new rule that ODF has for everybody burning piles within their protection. Okay, so moving down to notifications, I think this part is actually particularly important for pile burning, because it's the kind of thing that can easily start a process of response from a fire response agency that's totally unnecessary. And, we know just putting wheels on the road and driving is one of the more dangerous things that we do. And so ensuring that response doesn't occur when it doesn't need to is a part of that, as well as making sure neighbors know what's going on and who to contact if they have any issues. And as Tim's already shown, when we work through these things, we find little things we got to fix. So let's see, moving down into the burn unit description, we added a link to the pile calculator that helps you determine your piled fuel loading. And I actually made this change partially based on some feedback from the committee, but also my own thoughts, that I've always found that the acres, if you will, associated with piles are pretty variable. Some people are looking at the pile footprints, I guess, I don't know, or maybe their area around them. Others are looking at what the treated area associated with the piled material was. So I put size of area treated because, that seemed to be more aligned with what my experience had taught me. That doesn't mean I'm right, though. So if other people have thoughts on how to account for acres, please let me know. And then I also changed the piled, I put it in as piled fuel type, because we have an adjacent fuels section to talk about what could it burn into and what have you done to prevent that. Katie.
Yeah, I wonder if I get acres, but I wonder if we should also be asking for like the approximate number of piles, because that would feed directly into smoke, right? Like you could treat 5 acres, but if it's only 2 piles, that's not going to be a lot of production. But if there's 50 piles in those 5 acres, that's going to be different. So just a thought.
Yeah, and we have piled fuel loading, but that doesn't tell you, is that all in one pile or is that in 50 piles? So I'm just, because I don't want to get caught up in editing during the meeting, I'll just put a comment in here.
Yeah, and it should include like how many piles are out there. I know when I do my registrations for burning right now, I usually give a real close estimate of how many piles are actually on the unit. And then the tonnage related to that's going to be put up, and the size of area treated, should be where the material came from to the pile. So that would be outside of just that footprint, because that gets your acreage correctly when you're trying to, because you're paying into the smoke management program, and it should reflect the proper acres of where the material came from originally. So like a cable yarding unit could be the whole unit because material came all the way to one landing pile right there. And so you might have all acres accounted for because material came from that whole area.
Yep, that totally makes sense. So in other words, we should leave that as is for area treated. Then we'll add a box for the number of piles. And then we'll have our piled fuel loading. And then that'll help make sure that all the information ODF needs for smoke is actually in the burn plan right there. And they can just pull that out and be like, okay, here it is. And they don't have to go messing around for that. Cool. Okay, that's great. Okay, moving on, adjacent fuels. I'm trying to keep this simple. I mean, we could get into more fuel modeling and other details, but we're also trying to make this not something that's a barrier for folks in terms of their ability to do this process. So we've got it simplified, but we could change that if folks thought we needed to. And let's see.
I got one other question. Is there any place on the pile burning that shows if they are covered or non-covered piles? Because that changes your smoke tonnage. They burn cleaner and hotter
yeah.
covered. And so that can get you smoke clearance easier or harder if they're not covered.
Okay, so maybe I'm thinking about where do we? I'm
I'd
just
put it right there in burn unit description, just add another box for covered versus uncovered,
yeah.
checkbox.
Okay, thanks for that. Ah. Okay. That's great. That's super helpful. Okay.
And Amanda, I like the idea of leaving the adjacent fuels simple, like we can always get more detailed if we want to, but
Mm-hmm.
I think that provides the basic level of information.
Right. Okay. That all sounds good. Formatting stuff here, obviously. You know, we added in what was recommended for let's see, let me get back to that. I got to go to my notes really quick just to make sure I'm reflecting this back accurately. So we had a few comments about things we could change in this area. There was something about prescription parameters and the objectives, but I was kind of struggling with that. I was able to do what you guys recommended when I prepared my example burn plan. And I was thinking that it might be something we actually put into our guide that we create for this eventually. But I have I'm open, but I'm just acknowledging that I was struggling with how to address prescription parameters beyond describing fuel moisture, prep around piles, patrol, mop up, just because I haven't worked with specific prescription parameters around fuel moisture and such for pile burning. And I think that might have come from Katie. So I don't know, Katie, if you have any thoughts on that, or I guess what my basic question is, would that be addressed adequately through either or both the example and a guide that's created to help people navigate creating a burn plan?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways to go about kind of defining what an appropriate burn window is for pile burning. I think I still do think that like a separate section, some sort of separate heading for like desired weather conditions, for example, could be helpful if this is a legal document that you're gonna hang your hat on. Some of that description about, you're not burning in the middle of summer when the relative humidities are in the 20s and winds are howling. I think something around that could have a box, or it could just be something pre-populated in the pile plan that says like, these are some general conditions to avoid. I don't know. Maybe it's too far in the weeds.
Well, I'm going to scroll down real quick, if you excuse me for jumping around, to see if I believe that when you gave me I might be incorrect on this, but I think there was something about the ignitions occurring where you expect that the things are going to be within prescription for a certain period of time. That might be in a different document that you had shared with me. But I'm curious if that would, like, if we said something in the briefing that said, you know, that the conditions in the morning are expected to still be there later in the afternoon. Because I'm thinking about like the dry side when you start burning piles in the morning under snow, and then the snow can have melted off by the afternoon. And I've seen them broadcast by the afternoon when there was snow on the ground in the morning. And so I think something that indicates that you've looked at a long range forecast beyond just when you start lighting your piles. Like, yeah, it's wet right now. Cool, we can light piles. Well, is it going to stay wet? Or is it supposed to get really dry starting tomorrow? And then maybe that will not hold for you. So I'm just wondering if there's a descriptive way we can approach that in the pre-burn checklist, or if it should be up in the objectives.
So is there an area in here that, I mean, they still have to get the buy off on the local unit forester for conditions or be able to burn to get the permit. That would be, you know, I've been shut down on burning because it's going to be a windy day or something, and ODF tells me, nope, not today, is not a good idea because of that. I don't know if there's something we could put in there that would have a checkbox of you verified with, you know, ODF protection on burn status, or, you know, I know it's part of your permit that I've attained a permit, and that permit usually says that in there as well. So I'm just not sure if we could put something that would make it simpler on that for conditions.
Yeah, Kenny, that's a good point. It's something it's easy to forget. And so both Katie and I come from federal backgrounds where you're sort of regulatory on this, you're enforcing at the same time that you're deciding whether or not to do something. So you're self-permitting basically, which requires a higher level of scrutiny to make sure that you're on the same page, right, with your line officers and such. And I think it's easy to forget that there's a really good, strong gatekeeper here. And it's very explicit in the rules that this is a voluntary program, ODF protection, and ODF is still the deciding entity in terms of whether or not to burn, and they can shut it down at any time. And that can be based on those conditions that you're referring to. So I think that can help us actually reduce the complexity of some of this process because we have that in place as a gatekeeper. But I think the points are still good because we want certified burn managers to be thinking about these things. Because there are cases where, you know, I think that they could be planning for something and not thinking about that in advance. So we want to make sure that that folks, you know, are doing things right in advance. Real quick, Kyle, I see you have your hand up. I just want to acknowledge that, but also say that we'll take public comment later during the committee meeting. We only have the committee members participating. Generally speaking, sometimes that isn't the case, but it seems like it is for the most part in my experience. So, but I really want to hear what you have to say. For folks who don't know, Kyle Lapham is the Certified Burn Manager, Program Manager from Washington. Okay, so I'm going to still note this conversation here about what we're talking about, just so so it's captured. And Shelby, just hold on. I gotta, yeah, never mind. Okay, I don't have my agenda up right now. So Shelby and or Tim need to keep me, tell me when to stop for public comment. All right.
I think let's finish this document. I think we're scrolling through it pretty well, but when we get a good segue, let's honor that public comment time when we get to it.
Sounds good. What time is that at, Tim?
9:40.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
So Kenny was right on the dot.
This will help me remember. All right. Okay, so we did have one recommendation to move contingency. Wait, was it? I think that came from John Punch's about moving contingency into its own section. I ended up keeping it where it's at because there's not a ton in the safety and medical piece. And I just was starting to feel like this plan was getting to be too lengthy. And so I did just keep it there. But I'm not fixed on that, John. You know, I'm still willing to talk through that more. Okay, and then we have our minimum resources. I think Amanda asked or had commented on that. But what we need is, no, she didn't comment on that. She commented on having a line for a printed name for the company. I put that up at the top. But these minimum resources are just, you know, the minimum of what you need. And we didn't have a whole lot in there. So other than that, the pre and post burn checklist is fairly similar. And I think with that, I should probably pause for public comment, and then we'll go through the understory broadcast burn plan, which shouldn't take too long because there weren't as many changes with that. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay.
And then,
Yep. So for folks who want to provide public comment, if you want to pop on your camera or raise your hand, take some time there. I knew Kyle was going to jump in. He was chomping at the bit already. He saw that 9:40 time pop around. Anyone else who wants to do that, we'll take you in line here. And glad to have you regardless if you comment or not. So Kyle, we give you a couple minutes here, but feel free to. And just like that, he was gone. Oh, there he goes. Okay,
Yeah.
go for it.
Yeah, more of a comment from my experience here in Washington. So we also have to permit our broadcast burning and many of our pile burning. And we have gotten to where some of the broadcast burning permits are the permits essentially reading refer to the burn plan. So they're essentially reviewing the burn plan and saying that looks good. The permit's gonna follow the guidelines of what the burn plan says. So when you were going through the pile burn plan, I could see scenarios where you submit a pile burn plan and the person issuing a permit might say, that looks good, we'll just use the information in your burn plan. I'm not as familiar with how your process works, but that's food for thought from what's been occurring in Washington.
thanks, Kyle. That's super helpful. I would like to think that would be a similar place we would end up.
And with this being new, there's always opportunities for crossover between smoke management and certified burn manager of trying to build some efficiencies into both. So right now we're still untangling some of those as we learn how to walk through implementation. So
and we also have a different process of smoke registration in Oregon than you do in Washington. And so the way that those two processes gatekeep, they interact, but they're different. And I think that's true up there too, but the way that we get permissions to burn and submit for those permissions are different.
Okay. Any other folks want to provide any comments for the committee? Kyle immediately turns off his camera. Sorry, Kyle, I'm picking on you today. With that, back to you, Amanda.
Okay, thanks everyone. Go ahead and share my screen again. Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and walk through the, and I guess another thing is that in the instructor guide, if you review that example pile burn plan and you think anything in there that, if you see anything in the example that seems like it should be made a part of the template, please let me know. I mean, that's kind of like the prescription parameter. I put a descriptive piece in there about what conditions you want to burn under for piles. So if there's ways to make that more explicit in a template, I'm open to that. All right, so let's see, that was the template. Okay, so now we're into the broadcast understory template. I'm trying to make sure I reference the notes from the meeting so that I feedback to you guys about changes that were made. All right. So under the contacts, we just changed it to nearby landowners and neighbors. And then we changed the required contacts to being more explicit about what kind of contacts those were. They're for fire, emergency response, and air quality. And those are the two groups of people that need to be contacted. So that was a change that we made. Let's see, I think now, I mean, there was a lot of suggestions about things to add to the registration, smoke clearance, and permits. And the thing is that there was things about expiration, ferns, 7-day notification or 7-day registration. And I realized that if you're not talking to a protection unit forester until like that point in time, then you're not really doing what you should be doing as a CBM anyways. I mean, this should all be ahead of time. And so, so ODF should be notified and they should be helping you out with this as far as getting those permits and that sort of thing. Now, you can add your own expiration in there if you want. But I think the key is to make sure there's sections in here for that, because it's going to vary based on when you're burning, whether it's harvest related or not. What is it, in season or out of season? I mean, there's so many different things that come into play that cannot all be captured in a burn plan when it comes to the requirements for permits and registration. And that's why it goes back to talk to your protection unit forester, because they know, and they also will be able to guide you through how they interpret locally the rules, because that's the reality. Our rules are vague enough in Oregon that there is a requirement for some level of interpretation at the district level. That's it's not a terrible problem. I'm not trying to indicate that. I'm just saying that you're better off going there than you are to go try to figure out the rules yourself or navigate all of that. There's basics that you have to learn around certified burn manager and such, but really working with ODF is the way to be successful. And if you do that, then you're going to have all the information you need for your burn plan. And so, you know, that's something to make sure is taught to in the course. Let's see. So very similar in terms of the other plan, other than that we have inside and outside the burn unit, because really pre-burn fuels inside the burn unit for a pile burn is inside the pile footprint, and the outside is what's outside of it. Let's see, I don't know that I need to work through all of these, but there was, because a lot of these didn't change, but we did have some stuff in contingency. We had a good suggestion for using the term contingency action points. And then I added including when and how to respond. And I think that's pretty straightforward. Oh, actually, when and how to respond was from John Punches. So this line right here has been, for whatever reason, a difficult one for us to figure out on our team creating this template. And this is where we've landed. And I like this a lot because it's putting it in time, what to do, where they are, and when to go for it, when to do something. And there, we had a discussion about values at risk within and outside the unit and prescriptive sideboards and mitigation measures. I added mitigation measures because I thought that was pretty important, but I was struggling with how we would do anything differently than we have here as far as, I mean, what Amanda's really talking about is if your timber itself is at risk and it's part of what you're burning, then you need to kind of describe what you're going to do or how you're going to protect that or what the limitations are. But I'm not sure that, I just really couldn't figure out how to change that. And and Amanda was wanting to see taking the resource management goals and combining them with values at risk for that reason, so that you could indicate how you were going to take care of the things within the unit. But really that is actually covered under the prescription side. When you go and game that out, then you determine under what conditions you can burn without causing that kind of damage. And if anyone has any thoughts on that, I wish she was here because that was coming from her and we talked through it a bit during the meeting. But I don't know if I'm being very clear there, but I'm opening that up for discussion in terms of how we sort of make sure those align. Because the resource management goals can be things like reducing fuel loading by a certain amount. But this is about what do we not want to cause damage to. So for example, limit mortality in timber above 21-inch diameter to, 1% or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that go in here. And she was wanting to see those combined, but I was really not able to figure that out. So if anyone has thoughts on that, feel free to speak up.
I would just have a comment. So, your objectives under a burn plan would be, you don't want mortality more than, you put that in your objectives of what you're trying to accomplish. What I look at values at risk is you have an adjacent landowner, and what are you going to do to prevent that from spread onto somebody else's land? And what are those mitigation factors that you're going to do? Those are your values. That's how I look at values at risk is I don't want fire over here because it's going to cause damage that I don't want. And it's either on my own reprod or it's outside the unit, right? That's the values at risk is how I look at it. If you're trying to meet objectives inside the unit, that would go under your, and yeah, we want to avoid mortality on 20-year-old reprod inside the unit or 50-year-old trees inside the unit. And how are you going to mitigate that? By slower burn or lower intensity, is how I'd look at it. And that's just my comment on that for values at risk.
Yeah, that's how I feel as well. I mean, that's my experience is, you basically write a prescription to protect the things within the unit. And then you do your holding to protect the things outside of it. Generally, holding will go inside to do some of that too. But yeah, and I mean, my thought was there's times when you have a burn unit and then there's something inside you can't burn around, like there's a rod station or something. You got to have something in there to keep that from burning up. That's kind of why I included inside and outside. And I think her mind went to the resource values at risk within the unit. And that's not, that's not really what this is about. So, but I think we can clarify this in the training as well as the guide that we're going to write for this burn plan too. Okay, any other thoughts on that? That's those were all the edits that were recommended for the understory broadcast burn plan. So
Amanda, will you scroll down to prescription?
yes. Oh, that's right.
Right after prescription, add that box there for, what did we call it? Prescription comments. We just need another box in there.
Right. Okay.
It's in the example plan, but it didn't make it into the template.
That's right. Thank you for reminding me.
Thanks.
Yeah. What was this? What was it you wanted that to say again?
I just labeled it prescription comments.
Okay.
It was just an area where those of us developing those prescriptions could add more detail about combinations of wind speed and fuel moistures that we don't want to exceed and things of that nature.
Okay. Thanks. Perfect. Okay. Yeah, so I think that's it for that piece. And does that take us to the instructor guide review now? I believe it does. Tim, I'm looking at you or somebody to who's looking at the agenda. I'm just going to go ahead and stop sharing for a second. All right.
Apologies for that one, Amanda.
No, that's okay.
So
It looks like we're right on time to start the instructor guide review now. Okay, cool.
So we had there was a break on there. Does anyone need a break?
Oh, yeah, that's right. We should take it.
Flying through a bunch of documents in an hour, or do you all want to just keep trudging through? Eventually you get scrolling fatigue, so I'll leave it up to you all. If you want to take 5 or 10 minutes to get a coffee break in.
Let's take a break.
Okay.
I would like it. How about we just come back at 10:05? Does that sound good? Okay. Mhm. All right. Hopefully everyone had a good break. I'm gonna go ahead and let's see, check the chat. Okay, we're turning at 10:05. I'm gonna share my screen again. I guess unless anyone has any thoughts on the burn plan templates after they took their break, anything there? Last call. Okay. Now, I guess by default, because we are accepting edits and recommendations for feedback, or feedback and recommendations for edits and changes up through the end of next week from the committee, that includes the burn plan, because it's in there. So if you have other thoughts on that, feel free to include them in anything you recommend to us as part of that. All right, back to the instructor. And then I'm gonna minimize-
I do have a question on burn plans. Has any of the field offices, the unit protection unit foresters or anything, have they been able to review any of these yet?
Yep, I
Okay.
have a list of people within ODF that have looked at these, and that was pretty, it was earlier on in the process, but there was a lot of influence on this template from folks like Jason Pettigrew and Willie Crippen in particular. They provided a lot of the feedback that we got on this.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Yep. They'll see it again, so they have another chance to provide feedback. I mean, on that note, I'll scroll up and give you kind of an idea of what we changed because of their input, and I'll make that quick, I promise. But moving up stuff like notifications, the permitting, the names, contact information, how to get to the unit, the lat and long, and specifically in degrees decimal minutes for aircraft response as needed in the event of a wildfire. And yeah, really moving a lot of stuff up front, and things like objectives, you know, they're like way down here, which is not common in a burn. If you look at the federal template, they put these things a lot further up front. So yes, thank you for asking about that. All right, we're going to go to the top from the beginning. I just want to give you guys a quick picture of how this came to be. Worked with John Punches and Heather Heward from University of Idaho. I think a lot of you know that already. And we took some of the federal training as reference, but what we really were trying to do was approach training around burn leadership, around burn management in a temporal spatial context, meaning we walk through time and space with this process as it unfolds when you're actually doing it. When you go to these classes like 301, 341, the way they're structured is around the burn plan elements for the most part. And so, and there's nothing wrong with that. It works for that audience and that process. But when we were turning this over and trying to figure out how to approach this, for a lot of folks, they don't know even where to begin. And they may have even burned it quite a bit, but don't know what it looks like to plan. And, you know, I've always said, I'll take easily 10 times as much time to plan a burn and get it set up as I actually do getting the burn accomplished. And so that feeds into a lot of this. So that's the way this reads structurally. And the intent of this guide is for training providers to take it after entering into an agreement with ODF. They take this guide and they create content, a curriculum with content that they then deliver. The first out the gate with that will be OSU Extension, partially because John's involved in this process and we'll be able to turn that out quickly, but then that will be published and available for use by any training provider who wants to use it. But we did not create a training that everyone delivers to the same training for everyone to deliver to the various audiences across the state, because we wanted to make sure that this could be taken and then tailored to the audience that it's being delivered to. So for example, if you're mostly teaching people about pile burning, you can really focus on that in the training. If you're teaching about cultural fire, you can focus on that and flavor it that way. I view this as more or less like the foundation and the framing of a building. And the training providers are going to figure out what kind of siding they want to put up, what kind of windows they want to do, that sort of thing. So, so that ultimately it has the same basic structure and everyone can pass the same exam, but what gets added onto that or taught to can vary. The other side of that is that it enhances the our ability to get the training out to more people by empowering our partners who are already doing training in wildfire suppression work to do this as well. And I think we're going to see all kinds of stuff come out of this. And I'm really, that's what I'm most excited about is seeing what kind of content training providers come up with and deliver. So I'm not going to read through all of this, but the initial piece is to kind of indicate that and then describe what the intent is. We have course objectives, which is identifying all of the applicable planning and implementation laws, policies, and guidelines, how to utilize the processes in preparing a plan for a prescribed fire, then looking at different tactics and strategies and their applications in various scenarios. And then what do you do after the burn? Because once ignition's complete, often your burn will go much longer smoldering than during that ignition phase, unless you're just burning grass. And so not forgetting about it and making sure to tend it until it's really done, absolutely done and called out is a focus as well. And we have pre-course work that involves online videos, which are in a document at the end of the instructor guide, a review of the administrative rules that apply to the Certified Burn Manager program, and then duties and responsibilities, which that document was created in the same chronological fashion as this instructor guide. So you'll notice that it follows those same bins as the duties and responsibilities. And that's really intended for to be something that if a CBM, if anyone wants to know what is a CBM responsible for, or if a CBM wants to remind themselves, what are my duties and responsibilities, it's all outlined in that document. So that's included in here as well. So all the pre-course work is in the instructor guide. And it's a total of 6 hours. Thanks to Kyle Lapham from Washington DNR for sharing their pre-work with us, because we did use that as part of this. It's not, ours includes other stuff too, but he had put together a really nice list of videos that help make sure everyone's on the same page with regards to talking about fire, about wildland fire. So the course materials include this instructor guide with all of these appendices. And the only thing that's not in here that you might be curious about are the field certification books. Those are in progress right now. They are not complete yet, but I decided not to put them in here because this guide is pretty lengthy already. And that piece is not the responsibility of training providers. And so I decided to go ahead and keep that separate. Then we also included an overview of the roles of the training provider, lead instructor, and unit instructor. I'm not going to go over those, but the key here is that in the rules, the way that it reads is that that instructors have background in either teaching adults for at least 2 years or working in prescribed fire. That's the way that the rules read. And so we would like to see lead instructors possessing experience in both. So we recommend that here, but we can't actually require it because it's not in the rules. And now into the part that I feel needs the most feedback, and that and I am not, I don't like right now, I'm not seeing folks, so you're gonna have to maybe say something to me, or maybe I'll bring you guys back in to where I can see you a little bit if somebody raises their hand. Okay, so now I can see if somebody's going to raise their hand and talk. But these are the unit descriptions, and this is the structure that we came up with. Heather Heward came up with the idea of coming up with the steps. You teach this to address this so that the CBM can do that. And so that's kind of our, I guess, theory of change, if you will, or theory of effectiveness in this is that if you teach the thing on the left by addressing the thing in the middle, the CBM, if they are able to successfully take that all in and reflect back, will be able to do all these things. And the things on the right are pretty well aligned with the certified burn manager duties and responsibilities. So the pre-planning phase is, it's really just looking at something, or a landowner comes to a CBM, or the landowner is the CBM and says, is this the right tool? Should I burn or not? And so it's the stuff that isn't even starting on the path of preparing a plan, but just considering it. But a lot of it leads right into it, such as identifying prescribed fire objectives to meet land management goals. And I really like the idea of, say, taking incomplete objectives and making them specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. And that it enables the certified burn manager to help the landowner or help themselves, if they are the landowner, to identify the goals and the appropriate corresponding prescribed fire objectives. So that's about, why burn. And then making sure that folks understand the rules of the game, that they are complying with the law and know how to reference that. Looking at notifications and best practices for doing that. And what this really comes down to is, when you consider all this before you even start writing a burn plan, can you do this? Is this realistic? And do you understand this whole process before you start down the path? And I have a fair amount of experience with folks coming to me, particularly when I worked for the Nature Conservancy and we were doing a lot of burning on third-party lands, people asking me to burn for them. And there's, I want to burn, and then can you burn? And what do you need to do to make that happen? And so that's really what this part is about, and understanding all that stuff. We have unit reference materials and resources, which include the pre-planning section of certified burn manager duties and responsibilities. The best practices smoke management guide actually isn't in, we didn't include that in here at this time, but it's a link that we'll make sure. In fact, I'll make a comment to myself on that we need to make sure we get that linked in there. And that's a USDA, I think, NRCS combined, or Forest Service USDA NRCS combined document. Is best practices in smoke management. Actually quite good, so we'll make sure that's in there. And then the key concepts relevant to assessment questions that students will be able to answer by the end of the training. And the hint, this is hint, or when you're in a class and they're like, you might want to remember this, and they pause to make sure everybody's paying attention. It's an answer to an exam question, or it is an exam question, right? So these are referring to the exam questions. And the way that our exam was developed was through a process of combining some of the scenarios that are in the exam for the NWCG RX 301-341 course. Some of it came from reference from Washington's exam, and some of it was created specifically for our state. I'd say that's broken out roughly into thirds. So about a third of the exam is newly created because it needs to be to address laws and rules and regulations in Oregon. A third of it is just questions that I thought were really good and didn't need to be recreated, or I altered them perhaps a little bit for our purposes, but they're essentially similar. And then, yeah, Washington had already created an exam. I thought it was pretty good, and so I pulled some questions out of there. So the planning section, and also the time frame associated with each of these units, we've got that identified here, but we'd also take feedback on that, more time or less time on these different units. The idea here is this would end up being about a 3-day training. So planning would be a whole day, of course. And, there's folks who might think we should spend a lot more time on that, and we certainly could, I think. But, the reality is we need to balance between the amount of the volume of information and the rigor that we're requiring, and the accessibility and reduction of barriers to folks who have not had access to this before. So that's a whole process. And again, you know, the NWCG course spends more time on the planning here than we are, but their plan is a lot more complex too. And it's a different set of scenarios. So we have this is all the same process of taking steps. So this one is really about gathering information and then starting to write your plan. And that's working through all those planning pieces, determining your prescription parameters, making sure that you have the equipment you need, and holding plans, emergency planning, smoke management. I mean, basically everything we just walked through in the burn plan. And we only have the two references, or the materials and resources here would just be the templates and the planning document. There's a lot more references and materials and resources that can be used here, but those are the specific ones in the guide. And then here we have the assessment questions once again. And this is where I get into things like, for example, and highlight this real quick for discussion purposes. This question here: smoke management clearance, including registration 7 days in advance, is required for burning slash piles associated with forest management activities within ODF protection. That's why I don't necessarily want to have the burn plan say every single detail, because the training addresses this. And again, it says required for burning slash piles associated with forest management activities. Well, with SB 80, the CBM program was expanded beyond forest land to include all lands within ODF protection. And that means that there will be burning on non-forested lands within ODF protection where 7-day advance notice is not required. You don't have to register in advance 7 days. If you're burning a field off within ODF protection, you don't have to register for smoke. So I didn't want to put that in there because I didn't want that to create confusion or issues for people that are doing this. Instead, I wanted it to be in the training. So hopefully that makes sense. And there's a lot of very specific questions here, but that really is intended to get at both the pre-work and what we teach in the course. Because if you look at the pre-work, there's a lot of stuff in there about fuels and spread directions and things like that. You know, we know that there are people out there who have been doing a lot of burning who are very good, and they don't have all this technical language, or they don't have this kind of stuff mapped out already. And so we're trying to kind of marry up all of that. All those folks out there that we know have been burning, who have experience, who are really good at it, they know what they're doing, and we're not doubting that. But in order to bring it all up to speed, they've got to get some of this education covered. And so we've got some basic stuff in there to that end. The other thing, I'll just scroll back up here. Hopefully nobody's getting too busy. But at the top, I also try to tie these together. So Unit 1, that's the beginning. Unit 2 demonstrates the process of burn plan preparation, including assessment, integration of risk management as described in Unit 1, so that it's understood, like Unit 1 leads to Unit 2, Unit 2 leads to Unit 3. So Unit 3 is both prep and mobilization. Just drink a little water there to wet my whistle. So this is for prepping and mobilizing. It's about making sure your prep's adequate, taking the time to get that done, and how you decide to burn, getting ready for it. And I think this is pretty straightforward. Looks like we left out the materials piece there. We'll put that back in there. I'm going to pause for questions while I'm doing a little editing on the fly.
So I had a question on, or I guess comment on, the forestry / pile burning.
Yeah.
It's ODF has regulation over any forestry / burning that was related to any harvest. And I think in the training that needs to be sort of clarified, because like land clearing they don't have regulating authority over burning on land clearings. Or
Right.
how is this going to work outside ODF protection with people that want to do burns that ODF has no regulating authority over, but you might have, like Lane County has Lane Regional Air Authority. Is this stuff going to be recognized under that?
Yeah, so one thing is that this only applies to ODF protected lands, so nothing outside of ODF and LRAPA would be concerning there. But there are areas within ODF protection that LRAPA regulates for air quality. If it's not a harvest related slash pile, they will give you an open letter permit. Like say you've there was a removal of a bunch of filberts on ODF protected land that TNC was managing, and they charged like LRAPA charged by the cubic foot for the pile burn for that. So, but that's the only place in the state where the county, or not county, but a local air protection agency is the regulating entity. Outside of Lane County, then it goes to DEQ. And yes, all that does need to be addressed in the training. So I think what I'm hearing you say is we need to highlight this more and emphasize it, maybe, or ensure that this gets taught to. Is that kind of
just for somebody that doesn't know all the laws and stuff, understanding what ODF actually regulates within the protection boundary. And then the training should have something of, if you're outside ODF protection and you still want to try to accomplish burns, on how that process is going to work. Because there's a lot of people that are outside ODF protection that have forest land or ag land that they want to be able to maybe use fire as a management tool, and how that process is going to work as well. And each area is going to be different, of course, on how that's going to work. And it can probably get very confusing at that point, but there's got to be a mechanism there to be able to help a burn manager understand that. And Lane County is a little different. Most of the field burning is not allowed now in Lane County. So, and that was a pretty good tool for management for ag, but how do we get buy off, I guess, in the future. And that's a little outside just the going through this training, but just thoughts and comments I've been thinking about for the last few weeks.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. I think, we really have to focus this on what we're going to require within ODF protection, but there's enough of what happens within ODF protection that still applies outside. Like, meaning if you're burning non-harvest related material outside Lane County, you got to go through DEQ. And that's the same outside of ODF protection. It's no different on either side. I guess the Jackson County open burning regulated area has its own thing too. So there's another area that's there's a lot of areas that are going to be smoke sensitive receptor areas, for example, are going to be, more highly regulated. But regardless, DEQ is to whom we go if it's not ODF or LRAPA.
Yeah, and is DEQ going to buy off on this, burn manager class when people become certified and be able to maybe accept burn plans that are not ODF and be able to get burning done, I wonder?
Well, I think it's more a matter of figuring out where burning falls within DEQ's regulatory environment, which is that's a whole other space to navigate. But I think there's a lot of potential there. I don't think that I don't see them. I don't know how, I actually don't know how that's going to play out, but regardless, we have to teach to what the law requires, which is that DEQ permits outside of ODF's requirements within its protection, technically. Tim, yeah.
Yeah, there's Jennifer. So I was gonna say DEQ has been pretty close with us in this process since we do share the smoke management rules with them. So we're trying to stay as close alignment to be efficient and to be as less bureaucratic as possible, if that's capable these days. But saw Jennifer, since she popped up, may call her to see if she's got anything else to add in there.
I know that, Margaret has been a lot more engaged in this conversation. She is just out of the office this week. But we are trying to work closely with ODF to ensure that we can do some burning outside of your protection boundaries. I know it's a lot more complicated the further north we get just because of the populations that exist in that area. But definitely more in the southern part of the state and the eastern portions of the state, it is a little bit easier for us to allow for additional burning. And that's just, that's something that we are going to continue to work with you all on so that we can get these fuels off the landscape.
And I would just add to that, Kenny, that DQ just came out with a very useful map that helps you navigate what the regulations are and based on your location. So you can go in there and you can click your location, and then you can select from the drop down menu of all the different kinds of burning that they regulate. It's just they don't have like a category for prescribed fire per se, or controlled burning. So that's why I say it's more about finding where you fall within the rules with your burning than it is about their process of go, no go. And yeah, I think that it's all going to pan out just fine in the end.
Yeah, and I would just say that we put a section in that training, in this training system of, if you're outside, here's the avenues you got to go look at. And it would just be a side training note within your planning, because you got to know if you're within ODF protection or not, and then your avenue to go. Burn managers should know all avenues to be able to get their accomplishment done if needed. So that I would put that in the training someplace as an avenue, because I had to do that a lot with landowners back in the day with smoke management, of telling them exactly, here's the avenue you got to go down to be able to get this done.
Okay.
And I did put the link to our open burning map in the chat. So if anybody's not familiar with that, the link is there and you can go in and click around and see what it does.
Yeah, it's really useful. I mean, even just if you want to find out what protection district you're in, like whether or not you're in a rural fire protection district, it has all of the maps. It's extremely detailed and very useful for a lot of purposes. I'm so glad they made it. So definitely check that map out, and we'll want to include that in our training as well. All right. Thanks, Kenny. Appreciate that. Let's see here. Preparation and mobilization. Talked a little bit about that. And as you move through this this instructor guide, you'll notice you go from a lot more of the planning and regulatory environment into what it actually looks like in a burn, and that's intentional, because you go from high level considerations of what you need to plan and notify for to how do you make this burn happen. And so this is moving into that preparation and mobilization piece. Oh, we did put the unit reference materials. They were just below. Okay. All right. So any questions on this section? This is really about planning for anything that you don't want to have happen, making sure what you intend to have happen happens, that you have everything you need, that everything in the burn plan that you've said you're going to do is going to happen. That's really what it comes down to. Let's see. Any questions on that part? Okay. So now the implementation piece, and I think it gets back to what I said in the beginning. We only have 6 hours on implementation, and more than twice that much time to spend, or right around twice that much time to spend on the preparation, mobilization, planning, pre-planning. But in theory, a lot of the things that you need to know for implementation have been addressed already before you're actually at that point. And so this is really burn day itself, prior to ignitions. And there's some overlap here too, because mobilization essentially is moving into implementation. So, and that's identified there in the summary in terms of the process of prescribed burn planned for in Unit 2 and prepped and mobilized for in Unit 3. And so, some of this is best practices in terms of briefings, making sure to reassess critical holding points, considerations for how you configure your personnel and equipment, and people management. Why do you use the go, no go checklist? Or should we change that to the pre-burn, pre and post-burn checklists? And some of this is, we've used material, we don't want to, recreate out of nothing stuff that's already been done before. But when you do that, you have to make sure if you change the terminology, that's consistent throughout. So we started with a go, no go checklist, and then I changed it to pre and post burn checklists so that it was not just, go, no go means can I burn or not? That doesn't follow through to like after your burn, is it out? Did you patrol it, mop it up, everything else? So that's the rationale behind changing the terminology to pre and post burn checklists. But I still need to go through and remove the terminology or sync up the terminology. Okay. And then once you're burning, what do you do as things change? And then having some scenarios where you have to change your ignition pattern or address issues that occur, which they almost always do, with holding, and best practices for communicating between ignitions and holding, observations of smoke and fire behavior, and monitoring fuel moisture. How do you do that during a burn? Why do you do that during a burn? Of course, contingency and wildfire declaration, extremely important. How do you determine the specifications for mop up and patrol? What feeds into that process? And I really appreciate the reminder that we need something in here about just declaring a prescribed burn out. I actually have noticed that is not really necessarily in burn plans, and it probably should be. Somebody saying at some point that they have vouched that this thing is done. But we also know how long things can go on for when we thought they were out. Burns that, didn't show anything and then popped back up again later. And that's particularly true with pile burning. Acknowledging that not everybody wants to put their name on that, but also acknowledging that it really needs to happen. And this gets to the formal transition of responsibility, which is a form that we created to ensure that the CBM has a point where they're no longer to be responsible for the burn, and they've either turned it over to another certified burn manager or they've turned it over to the landowner, because those are the two entities that can be responsible for fire. Well, that's not the only two. There's a ODF, Forester, and the others, but in this case, it's either the certified burn manager or the landowner, and that form is at the end. So there's a formal prescribed fire transfer of responsibility form. We started off by calling it a transfer of liability form, but it's actually not somebody could be held liable at some point, but it's really about who is responsible for taking care of that piece of ground while it's still on fire until it's not anymore. That's what the point is, not who's going to get in trouble if it takes off on you.
So I got a question on that. So, under Oregon law, the landowner is responsible no matter what, even if they have a certified working for them. That should be,
Not true.
If you put fire to your property, that landowner is responsible, technically.
Under 526.360, the certified burn manager is responsible. And that supersedes 477.
Okay.
But that's a common misconception. Most people think what you just said. So Tim, you want to add to that?
Yeah, it's Kenny, it's when you think about the liability wise, there's the whole host of folks that are out there have that. perception. Landowners are responsible for what happens on their property. However, in many cases, that turns into the operator is usually the most responsible for conducting it, and certified burn manager could be akin to an operator under that, as use of fire on forest land is considered an operation. So it kind of gets transcribed into there, where the most responsible would be the certified burn manager in this case. The landowner has that holding since it is on their land, but usually, in this business, there's always agreements and contracts for service and all this stuff in between folks. In some cases, the landowner might be the certified burn manager, depending on the circumstances. So it's hard to get it on the spot, but the most responsible person would be the CBM. And then having the trail, the documentation of, say, multiple certified burn managers are in the same company, of transferring that responsibility from one individual to the other. Because the certification is tied to an individual, not to the company per se. So there's some of that transfer, similar to a record of fire. That's what the actual form was based off of. So that we could keep consistency and have something that's recognizable that we've utilized in the past.
Okay, yeah, because like on a record of fire, landowner and operator are one and the same under the law.
Yep. So this would be there, and most responsible is the term we use when we walk through the portions of who gets the citation and that kind of stuff. So.
Okay.
And just since we're talking about it, I went ahead and scrolled down to that form so you guys can take a look at that. We based on the OARs of 62942, and it's pretty straightforward, but that's there for that purpose of documentation, that transfer, so that CBM doesn't remain responsible beyond the time that they can actually be effective in that responsibility.
Good. Yeah, it's been a long time since I've gone through forest law, so
Yeah,
probably missed a few things. So
Yeah,
it's
this would
totally
be
fine.
akin to it, similar to the department turning a fire back to the landowner. The certified burn manager is turning the fire back to the landowner for responsibility, and then that's their transfer responsibility at that point. That was kind of the intent behind that process,
okay,
and a way of documenting it.
copy.
Okay. That was great though. That got that discussion going. We would have worked through that eventually. So thanks for that. Oh, Katie.
Yeah, just a quick thought on that form in particular. The descriptive location, right? Fire located at, and then you have township section range quarter. Is it possible to expand that descriptive location beyond that? Because I think a lot of folks don't actually pull up like the PLSS grid. So like township section range quarter and or a lat long or physical address. Just a thought for whenever we have feedback for that piece.
Okay. It should be in the burn plan up to the quarter part. So, but we should add, it should be, it's fine. Okay, cool. Thanks, Katie. All right. Let's see here. Where were we? I think we're not that far back. Okay, we're into implementation. We're down here. Oh, contingency, calling the burnout. Yep. Okay. And then an incident within an incident scenario. We have that as one of the assessment questions. And not sure what else to address there unless anyone has any other questions. Okay, and then demobilization and post-burn activities. This is really about just debriefing and releasing personnel, and completing post-burn documentation monitoring. I think it's important to note that there's also overlap here between the last unit and this, because the last one is all the way through declaring the burn out. And this is going back in time a little bit and demobbing people, doing some of the required documentation, and presumably sometime in this process, the burn would be declared out. And it has similar reference materials and resources. The CBM transfer of responsibility form is here as well, because the CBM, if they're the landowner, they might be the CBM the whole time, or maybe they'll transfer it later on. The only thing that's set in terms of how long the CBM has to be there on the burn is through ignition and the initial stages of mop up. And so, so they aren't required to maintain their status as a CBM is responsible for the burn, for days on end after that. They can transfer it to the landowner for patrol thereafter. And not as many exam questions associated with this. As I said, the final exam is not in this document, but it is essentially represented through the key concepts relevant to assessment questions in each of these sections. So you won't see that piece, but I did want to just walk through the duties and responsibilities document with y'all. And if anyone has comments on the example templates, they can provide those, but I wasn't sure that was the best use of our time today as far as going through those was concerned. So let's see, keep going. Okay. So as I said, we have, this was something we created at the very beginning. This was before we did any of the instructor guide. This is really the foundation of the instructor guide. And so if there's they say if there's problems with the foundation, the house is not going to do well. So if there's problems with this, which is really the foundation, then we need to know about that so we can change that and do whatever we need to do with the rest of the guide accordingly. And we took, a lot of these are taken from burn boss duties and responsibilities, but they've been heavily altered because they're pretty different as far as the federal responsibilities versus what we expect of CBMs. I mean, they're not terribly different in terms of the principles, but some of the specifics are. So again, the pre-planning phase is really about making sure that this is something that's doable and you have everything mapped out to start the planning process. And that really is, actually visit the proposed burn unit. I've had people ask me to prepare a burn plan or, try to get ready for a burn before even really getting eyes on the unit, getting a good idea of what needs to happen and whether or not it can happen. And so starting off on the ground is that's the place to begin. But at the same time, you've got to be mapping out all the requirements and applicable regulations and rules. And, again, this is kind of just bullet pointing all the stuff that's on the right-hand column spread out throughout the document. Most of these are in the same bins. A few of them are not. And one thing that we did, I'll scroll down to the end, is that we did break out demobilization, documentation, and post-fire monitoring, and that got lumped into demob and post-burn activities. But in here, we wanted to make it a little bit more clear that there was a few different things you do there: monitor, document, and doing the demob part. So thoughts on this? Do we want to, we've got about 10 minutes left on this section. So a little more than 10 minutes to work on the instructor guide here today. Aside from many people, myself being one, can do better if they have track changes on and they're just working through something and they provide feedback that way, and that's totally fine. But if there's any thoughts right off the bat about this approach, about how the guide is structured, or even specifics here, I'd like to open it up to that. I could also just kind of walk through these, or we can move on. How are folks feeling?
I would be happy to spend some time going through it in detail offline and then just marking it up and getting stuff back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, John. All right. Real quick, there's a transfer responsibility form. I'm just gonna show you guys the pre-work. These are just a bunch of different videos. One of them's like a DNR video from Washington. And then websites that are important to become familiar with, and some other reference materials. So that's the instructor guide. And I think with that, I'll stop sharing. So I think what we're maybe looking at next is some updates. And John, and I thought maybe don't want to put you on the spot, but I know you're probably good for it. Since well, just to talk a little bit about what I've already discussed with the curriculum process and what that's going to look like, and what we expect moving forward with rolling this out. I kind of already talked about that, but we'll take feedback up through the end of next week. If anyone needs more time, let me know. We'll work with you on that. And then from there, we'll refine and get ready for making official the instructor guide. At the same time, we're entering into agreement with OSU and other partners as they're ready to become training providers. And we have an MOU template that is basically ready to go at this point. So and then the content creation from, I don't know where you're at with John, if you want to talk about what that process looks like for you on the OSU side, or just have a chance to share with folks what your plans are with that.
So my intent is to create training materials that would be keyed to the guide that you just went through, to make sure that we've got something in place in order to help people who are going to deliver training have some content to be able to use. And so I'll create curriculum packages for each of those sections and have those available and post them on a website and let people freely use them. They'll become a public domain type of document to the extent possible. And the idea there is that it would be resources that would be freely available to use, so we don't have to impose upon contractors and industry and anybody else who needs this to totally go out and create from scratch their own curriculum. They're certainly welcome to do that if they want to, but we wanted to have something available. So that's just my offer, is to pull together those materials over the next few months and have something by this fall or early winter that could roll out and be available to do that. OSU is intending to be one of the providers of the training, and so we have to develop it anyway. And so it's just an idea of getting it out there as soon as possible to make that available. But I've really been waiting to an extent to make sure that the committee is comfortable with what's in the instructor guide there, because that's going to define what we put into the curriculum. And I will say that I've taught a few classes lately on prescribed fire. We did a series for NRCS people getting their job approval authority, and I purposely used the new template to see how well would it work. And I was able to pretty easily develop a relatively simple burn plan. I did 3 units and was able to get 3 different types of units into these burn plan templates, and it wasn't terribly hard to do. And I really tried to keep them not terribly detailed, but kind of thinking about like the level we would use with working with private woodland owners. And so I think the template works from my perspective. I'd be really curious to get feedback from others who do this from different perspectives and see if what we've crafted there. I will say that the example of the understory/broadcast burn plan is crafted from 3 different units that I did, and we kind of pulled stuff together. And so I probably should go back through it and make sure that I actually combined like things with like things. And it's probably way over resourced because I'm doing training burns and they're always over resourced. So feel free to give feedback on that if you want something that's more pared down to what you think would be likely to be what a CBM working with a private forest landowner would be likely to have in that context. I pared it down some from what I had in there, but it's probably still way more resources than what they'd be likely to have, but tried to give a good cross section. So anyway, that's what I've got.
And I had one question on, so once somebody goes through the training course and becomes so they get done with the training course, there is a certification book. Is that what I heard in the conversation? And who is going to evaluate that and who's signing that off, saying that this person is capable of performing these duties?
Yeah, so that would be a certified burn manager, somebody who already has the certification, or ODF forester. And
Okay.
so that is part of why we are accepting, we have a historical recognition pathway, and we have a pathway for existing NWCG type 2 burn bosses. So if you already have that qualification, then you can bypass the training exam and the field certification. There's also an option through historical recognition to just take the exam. And so what that means is that the field certification process is really for those who have had some experience burning, but perhaps not leading burns, and they want to. And so they go through the training, take the exam and pass it successfully. And then we issue a task book for either pile burning or both pile burning and understory broadcast burning. Those are the two. So understory broadcast includes piles. And then depending on which certification they seek, they'll do a certification book for that under the mentoring and training of a certified burn manager, presumably from that pool that we've already gotten through the door because of their existing skill sets and abilities and qualifications.
So ultimately, like a protection suit could go out and supervise and then sign that off saying they could do the duties. Or, I mean, you said certified burn managers. We don't really have any yet, of course. So just was wondering, because
Yeah.
I know how the task books work. You know, I'm still nationally qualified as task force leader. And
Yeah.
so I just want to make sure that, you know, somebody's supervising and seeing that somebody can do this effectively.
Yes, and so that's why people who are already type 2 burn bosses will be the term grandfathering, grandmothering, and whatever. So they will be blessed and they will be in the system. They will be certified, and they'll be available to oversee those who are looking for certification. And the Oregon Prescribed Fire Council is interested in helping us with networking to that end to get people connected. So what we're hoping to have, or what they're hoping to have, is kind of like an online tool where you can go in and say, I'm looking for a training opportunity, or you can say, I'm certified and I would like to help get others certified. And then that way people can get connected with opportunities. I can also, like, if you have somebody that needs it and there isn't a CABM available, I can come and help with that. And I'm not clear, Tim, maybe you can chime in on this about who within ODF can do that. We haven't really talked about that a whole lot. We've really been talking about the CBMs taking that piece on.
Yeah, so we're evaluating internally of who has the expertise to qualify for sign offs on this type of stuff to have the equivalencies. We recognize off the get-go that it's going to be having that supervision for the on the ground training and signing off the certification book. That's going to be a bottleneck. Working on evaluating that as well. So one of the opportunities with it, ODF is putting in for a grant proposal for trying to develop some, we'll call them learn and burn opportunities, where we can work with a landowner and suppression personnel, as well as the folks going through the CBM process, to have something established to get those burn opportunities as well. So we're going to evaluating those options, part of putting together a fledgling program. The training bottleneck was one we were working through, trying to avoid with the utilization of the training providers. And through those organizations, they do have folks who are certified to do this type of stuff, similar to the test book system under NWCG. So we're looking at all avenues with it. And any ideas that come up, we're all ears for trying to avoid as many bottlenecks as possible. But it's probably going to be a little bit of slow to get off the get-go, and Amanda's probably going to be doing a little bit of traveling to do some of the supervision and get folks signed off.
Yeah, and I would also add that Katie Sarbre and I talked a little bit about the potential for using the Trex model to apply to this somehow. So not sure what that would look like ultimately, and we just need to talk more about that, what TNC can do to help. But regardless, we're thinking about exactly what you're talking about, because we know that's what's up ahead of us. And that was a big reason why we wanted to make sure to decrease the bottlenecks for those who could become CBMs quite easily right now, because they already have the training and experience. It's just a matter of what that pool looks like and how able we are to connect them with people who need those field certification opportunities.
One more thought. I don't remember where we landed on this, but could either like Cal State RX burn boss or a Washington program certified burn manager potentially, if they come to Oregon, be a reviewer for an Oregon CBM person going for the qual?
If they pay $50 for a certification and get our card, yes. We accept the equivalency of others. We accept other states. Now, that said, we want to see their documentation. And in Washington, you can certify to become a broadcast burner on a pile burn. And so if we saw that come in for an understory broadcast CBM and that we hadn't actually seen that person had led understory broadcast burns, then we might just make them a pile burn CBM, which that's just because we want to be careful about that. We decided to split them out, and Washington only has one certification, so they didn't delineate between the two. California's not a pile burn, it's just broadcast. But again, they submit their documentation for their existing CBM qualification to us. We review it. They pay $50 for their certification card, and we issue that to them, and then they can do that. But I don't know that we would otherwise accept them from another state without becoming a CBM here. I don't know if Tim has anything to add to that, but that's the way I read that.
Yeah, it's nothing to add. It's we're still evaluating. We have our rules in place according to our authorizing statutes and comparing them to other states. So we want to be as less bureaucratic as possible, but still recognizing that $50 for an application fee is probably one of the lowest application fees across any certification currently, and it was intended to be that as well, to keep it feasible. So that was part of the setting that number.
Yeah, it's just to pay for my time and looking at that stuff, which I don't even know that would cover that, but that's really what it's for, that and issuing a card.
Yep. The card and the paperwork.
Yeah.
Okay, I have a few more updates if folks are ready to, as we get into the last topic here, and then we might be out hopefully on time, unless I prompt a whole bunch more questions. So we got out of legislative session finally. That closed out in a fury. One bill of note related to this committee is Senate Bill 80. That was most of the attention on that bill was around the wildfire risk map. However, at the tail end of it, in the last couple of sections, there's two aspects of note. One is it adjusts 526.360, where it says that a certified burn manager may be used on forest land within ODF protection districts to may be used within ODF protection districts. So it did change the forest land requirement for the certification, or I should say the limitation of that. It's a lot easier to find where our district boundaries is than that if you're on a class 1, 2, or 3 forest land. So that should help. So that will prompt an administrative rule change for the rules that govern the program. The department is not anticipating pulling together an advisory committee for that. It's going to be a technical rule adjustment. We're just going to look at that language and get it and have the update through that. So that's a good one for us. Makes it more transparent about where you can utilize your certification. Also helps ODF be able to assist with burns on non-forest land as well, so that we can do some of that learning and get some more experience as well. Along with that, there's also language around establishing a liability fund for prescribed fire, and $5 million was appropriated to that fund. That is a joint venture between ODF and the Department of Consumer and Business Services, so DCBS. DCBS and ODF are currently evaluating the law or the bill, and we're meeting next week to help put together kind of a framework game plan. Anything with liability, going to have a few DOJ consults with us in the meantime before we get an advisory committee together to help us with that. So it's in process. We're doing the pre-work so that we have it set up well. I would anticipate it might take a few months for that to be identified. Fully understanding how that bill was written, and also making sure that it met the intent of what the authors and the legislators were trying to get across as well. So looking at it from a couple different angles, but I would anticipate we'd be looking at that group as far as pulling a resource group together after we get more of a plan in place. So stay tuned for that one. That fund, I believe, runs until 2025 or 2026. So it has a few biennia worth of appropriations with it. We just got to untangle a few things in the mix. Those are my two big updates. With that, any other questions for the good of the order? Or comments, updates, announcements? That was a lot of pages of text to go through in a 2-hour span. Commend you all. See, Kenny's still reading through it. So, yeah, Amanda, I think that's it for us.
Great, well, yeah, I don't think Kenny's the only one still reading through it. And I would have liked to have gotten that to you guys sooner than we did, but I also wanted to make sure it was better than it would have been if I had sent it to you sooner. You know how that goes. So that's part of the extension of time for the committee members to provide feedback. Super grateful. I've said it before, I'll say it again, to John and Heather Heward for their expertise as people who really focus on education, adult education. It's something I've done a lot of. I have a training background, but that's not my expertise. And so they've really helped make sure that this kind of makes sense in terms of how to teach. And but I really do want folks to take a close look at those unit summaries and those boxes in particular. Does that make sense? Is there stuff that needs to come out? Is there stuff that needs to go in? And be liberal and don't be afraid to make suggestions for change, because we want this to be good. Well, with that, I guess we're going to close this meeting out, eh?
Thank you all.
Thanks.
Thanks for everyone who joined as well.